There's a jar that used to sit on almost every farmhouse windowsill in America. No label, no expiration date. Just ginger, sugar, and water, quietly turning into something alive. And the strange part is, most people today have never heard of it, even though their own grandparents probably kept one going without ever calling it anything special. It was just what you did. I first saw one 3 years ago in a kitchen in rural Ohio. An older woman pointed to a cloudy quart jar on her windowsill and told me, almost offhand, that this was what her family drank through hay season, through winter colds, through everything. No pharmacy trips, no vitamin aisle, just that jar, fed a spoonful of ginger and sugar every morning like it was part of the family. I didn't think much of it at first. We've all been trained to associate real health with something that comes in a sealed package. A label, a barcode, a dosage chart. A mason jar on a windowsill doesn't look like medicine. But the more I dug into where this tradition came from, the more I realized it wasn't nostalgia. It was a genuinely clever piece of food science that most of the country simply stopped practicing. Here's the problem it was solving. Before refrigeration was common in rural homes, before electrolyte drinks existed, before you could drive 10 minutes to a pharmacy, farm families still had to survive brutal, sweaty labor in the heat, and brutal dry winters with nothing but what was already in the kitchen. So they leaned on something humans have used for thousands of years across almost every culture: fermentation. Not as a health fad, but as a practical tool. Ferment your cabbage, it lasts the winter. Ferment your milk, it becomes something new and useful. Ferment ginger and sugar and water, and you get a living, mildly fizzy base you can build almost anything from. The basic version is almost absurdly simple. Grate a tablespoon of fresh ginger into a quart jar. Add a tablespoon of plain sugar. Add 2 cups of filtered water. Not tap water with chlorine in it, since chlorine can slow down the wild yeasts and bacteria that naturally live on ginger skin. Cover the jar with a cloth, secure it with a rubber band, and leave it somewhere at normal room temperature. Every day you feed it another spoonful of ginger and sugar. By day 3 or 4, you'll start to see small bubbles. By day 5, it's active, what old recipes usually just called the mother. That single jar becomes the base you keep alive indefinitely, the way people keep a sourdough starter going for years. Why does this actually do anything? Ginger skin naturally carries wild yeast and lactic acid bacteria. Feed them sugar and water, and they do what living things do. They multiply, they produce mild acids, and they create a lightly fermented liquid with more going on nutritionally than plain sugar water. It's the same basic principle behind kombucha or a sourdough starter, just older, cheaper, and requiring no special starter culture you have to buy online. From that base, farm families built a drink called switchel, sometimes called haymaker's punch, which field workers carried out during long, hot days of labor. The classic version mixes a cup of the ginger ferment with a splash of raw apple cider vinegar, a spoonful of honey or molasses, and a couple quarts of cold water. It's worth being honest about why this actually helped. The vinegar provides a mild source of acetic acid. The molasses or honey brings back potassium and trace minerals lost through sweat. And the ginger has a long-documented mild effect on circulation and nausea. In an era before Gatorade existed, this was, frankly, a reasonably smart homemade electrolyte drink. Not a miracle cure, just decent hydration science stumbled into generations. Before sports drink, companies patented the same basic idea and sold it back to us in neon colors. There's also a version built for cold season, sometimes called fire cider. Garlic, onion, horseradish, ginger, citrus, and hot pepper, steeped in vinegar for several weeks, then strained and sweetened with honey. I want to be straightforward with you here, because this is where a lot of modern content oversells things. Fire cider is not a substitute for medical treatment, and it will not cure an infection. What it actually is, at best, is a spicy vinegar-based tonic with modest anti-inflammatory and mildly antimicrobial ingredients. Garlic and ginger both have real peer-reviewed research behind them for supporting general immune function. That's genuinely worth something. It is not a replacement for antibiotics. And if you or someone in your family develops a serious infection, a high fever, or breathing trouble, the right move is still a doctor, not a mason jar. Anyone telling you otherwise is trading your safety for a good story. So why did this practice mostly disappear from American kitchens? It wasn't suppressed by any single company or industry. It's a more boring, more believable story than that. Between the late 1940s and the 1960s, 3 things happened at once. Refrigeration became standard in almost every home, meaning families no longer needed fermentation to preserve food or drinks. Bottled soft drinks and eventually sports drinks became cheap, convenient, and heavily advertised. And pharmacy chains expanded into small towns, making over-the-counter remedies faster to reach than a 5-day ferment. None of that required a conspiracy. Convenience just quietly won, the way it usually does. The communities that kept these traditions alive the longest, Amish and Old Order Mennonite households in places like Lancaster County and Holmes County, weren't hiding secret knowledge from the world. They simply didn't adopt the conveniences that caused everyone else to let the practice fade, because their way of life was built around not changing with every new trend. If you want to try this yourself, it costs almost nothing and takes about a minute a day. All you need is a mason jar, a piece of cloth, a rubber band, fresh ginger, sugar, and filtered water, all available at any grocery store for a few dollars. Keep the jar somewhere at normal room temperature, out of direct sunlight, and feed it daily. If you're traveling, you can slow it down in the fridge for a couple weeks and wake it back up when you return. Treat it like the small living culture it actually is, and it'll keep going indefinitely. Some families have kept the same ginger mother alive for decades simply by feeding it. A few honest limitations before you start. This isn't a medication, and it shouldn't replace one. If you're on blood thinners, diabetes medication, or have a compromised immune system, talk to a doctor before adding any fermented tonic to your routine, since ingredients like vinegar and ginger can interact with certain conditions. Pregnant women should be cautious with unpasteurized ferments, and if a jar ever grows mold, smells off, or looks wrong, throw it out and start over. Fermentation is safe when done right, but it isn't magic, and it isn't foolproof. What I actually find worth thinking about isn't that this jar can replace your medicine cabinet. It's that somewhere along the way, we outsourced almost every small, useful skill we use to just know how to do ourselves. Not because those skills stopped working, but because something more convenient came along and we never looked back. This ginger mother isn't going to fix modern healthcare, and it's not trying to. But it's a small, cheap, genuinely interesting piece of food science that your great-grandparents understood, and most of us have simply forgotten. Sometimes, recovering that kind of knowledge isn't about rejecting modern medicine. It's just about not losing the small, useful things along the way. That's it for this one. Hidden Fix Lab.